Hi everyone! Wow, what a crowd! What a roof! What a day! We have the really trifecta. Everything is here like perfect. We have great wine. We have great people. We have a lot of content for you. And I have to say, we really waited a long period of time to host you back in our events. So we're super excited to have this kickoff, and this is phenomenal. So thank you first, everybody, for coming. There are COVID issues, there are day-to-day issues, there are science in the background. So life is happening, and still you choose to come here, and we really appreciate it. We had a very long period of time COVID, but today we're here to celebrate. We're here to celebrate. First, we're going to have Binance with us, celebrating 4 years. For those of you who don't know Binance, it's a good opportunity to get to know them. They'll be active more and more in Israel, and you'll hear more about them. So we have a lot of content ahead of us. We have 5 sessions today, 6 actually. First, we're going to have Nir Netzer from founding partner at Equitech, having a short overview, then followed by a keynote by Dr. Ira, sorry, Ira Rick Lachman from Binance. Then we're going to have Kai Alzi, who's the co-founder of Banco, for another keynote, following by fireside chats. First, we're going to have Hype, which is a company by Kaspit, and we're going to have Ohad Maimon, the CEO of Hype, and Iris from Shibboleth, the FinTech lead, following another fireside chat with Xberry and Hassan's. And lastly, we're going to host Odette Salumi, who's Director of Payments in Bank of Israel, for the last fireside chat. So we have a lot of content for you. Bear with us. We will be trying to stay strict on time. So for all the speakers, you'll see me waving for like when you have 2 minutes left. Okay. So without further ado, I would like to invite my partner first, but the founding partner of Equitech, Nir, to take the lead and give you some insight about what we're going to have today, about the crypto space and payment. Thank you again for coming, and that's it. Let's start.
Thank you, Tal. Thank you very much. You hear me okay?
I thought you would applaud. I really thought you would applaud.
Okay, great. So, first of all, thanks for coming. Really exciting to see everybody here after a really long time. It's the second event we do, which is in-person event after a long break. So that's great. And today we're celebrating. We're not just here to talk about crypto and alternative payment means. We're celebrating Binance fourth birthday. So give it a hand, give it applause for Binance. I don't know if all of you know Binance. Ira is here right after me. She's going to tell you all about it. This is actually the global Binance birthday. Everybody all around the globe in different continents, right, Ira? Celebrating right now the same thing. But before we start, I want to talk about crypto. I want to talk about alternative payment means, and just to give you a short overview. Okay, so you know how Bitcoin started back in 2008, let's say. Everybody thought it's going to be something that is a bit shady, maybe. People didn't believe in it. But now we see that we have more than 10,000 different crypto coins out there, and their market cap is $1.5 trillion. So I'm not sure if you see that behind me. It's everything is in there. I think that with the evening, as the evening goes on, the sun goes down, and we're going to see the screen. But I'll tell you all about it. By the time you're going to see it, I'll tell you all about it. So what's interesting to understand, Bitcoin is definitely the leading cryptocurrency out there with the market cap of a bit more than $600 billion. Right after it, we have Ethereum with about $200 billion market worth. And it was just recently when Bitcoin hit the all-time high with $65,000 per coin. And it's really outstanding. If you take a look at last April 2020, it was 7,000. So it's like times 10 almost in a year. Now I know that it cut in half because 65 was 2 months ago. Now Bitcoin worth is about 30, I think 2 and something for today. So this is Bitcoin, but it's not all about Bitcoin, right? If you talk about the Israeli ecosystem. If you talk about the Israeli alternative payment ecosystem and about the Israeli blockchain space, so it's interesting to understand we have 200 Israeli startups working in the blockchain field. Huge amounts of money invested in blockchain. Since the beginning of 2021, we have more than $100 million invested in mobile wallets, more than $290 million invested in digital payments. These numbers are more than double than the numbers of whole 2020, and this is just half year of 2021. So we see that this space is moving fast. We see that this segment is really interesting for different global investors. And we are here in Israel, we see a bunch of different solutions that definitely support financial industries as they go forward to adopt blockchain technologies and blockchain-based infrastructures. And talking about different financial institutions, we have also the governmental phase or angle. And we're going to have here Oded Salumi from Bank of Israel later on today. As the last speaker, he's going to tell you all about it, how Bank of Israel is actually thinking about the digital currencies and the digital shekel is going to adopt. So this is a really interesting use case. We might be able to use digital shekel not very far away from this day. So I want to thank you all again for coming. I want to call Dr. Ira Rick Lachman to take the stage and to tell you all about Binance. Give her applause. Thank you.
I want to try something. I really hate microphones. Can you hear me like this? No? That's because you hate this. Yeah, so is this better? Okay, all right. My name's Ira and I work for a little company called Binance.com. So if you haven't heard about Binance.com, the world's greatest, biggest, most famous, most infamous, most interesting, most diverse crypto exchange, then you come to me later on and I'll tell you all about it. And today we are here to celebrate our 4th birthday. But I'm not going to be talking about Binance, and I want to tell you one more thing. I really don't care about Bitcoin. I don't care about Ether. I don't care what you buy. I don't care what you invest. I don't want you to buy anything on Binance.com, and this is not financial advice. Here's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about payments, and I'm going to suggest to you that we are thinking about payments the wrong way. And I'm going to suggest to you that payments is a cultural thing and that we are about to change our culture. This is what we're going to be talking about. My colleague Guy is going to be talking later about education and exclusiveness and inclusiveness. This is what we're going to be talking about. This is what we are here and this is what we're about. So I want to tell you a little story. I used to live in London for several years, and I came back to Israel with my family about 2 years ago. And I moved to Tel Aviv, and I went to Rabin Square, and I think I wanted to buy a milk carton or something like that. And I came to the cashier, and it cost, I don't know, how much does milk cost in Israel these days? $500. And I wanted to pay. And I came to the thingy that he had there, and I'm calling it a thingy deliberately. And I took my phone out and I did this. And the person at the cashier is looking at me like I'm having a stroke. And he goes, "What are you doing?" And I'm going, "I'm paying for the milk." And I keep tapping my phone at the thingy, which is apparently for the Avka and not for payments. And he goes, "Are you from here? Do you understand Hebrew?" In clear Hebrew. And I go, "Oh yeah, I am from here." And he goes, "So you don't know how to pay with a credit card?" And I go, "Yeah, I do know how to pay with a credit card." Sure thing, I take my credit card out and I start tapping it on the same thingy. Little did I know when I came back from London that Israel had yet to implement the EMV standard. And this is why I did not understand how to pay in my own country. Because for 5 years I would walk around and do this, and it literally became a part of my muscle memory. I did not know how else to pay for things. And then this gentleman at the cashiers is taking my card away. He is taking my personal credit card with his hands away from me. And he is doing this disgusting swipe movement, which I've never seen before. And then he hands over a piece of paper and he wants me to sign on it. I've never seen something more primitive in my life. I literally forgot how it's done. So this is when I was reminded that I'm back home, and this is how we pay in Israel these days, those days rather, right? In the culture in the UK at the time, in Europe, EMV was the golden basic standard. No one knew anything other than that. If you come to the US, however, at those times, and you would have sat somewhere in a restaurant or in a bar, had yourself a nice little cocktail, you would get the bill, you would give over the credit card, the gentleman would again take away your card away from you, bring it back to you, have you sign on the bill, and then add the tip. Who has ever heard of something like that? First you pay, then you say how much you want to tip. But for Americans, this is like the ABCs. This is how they pay for things. This is clear because this is the American culture. But if you go to Asia and you go to a market somewhere, in China perhaps, and you want to pay for a cucumber, what would you do? You would scan a QR code. This is the basic thing. You would scan a QR code. If you don't have a proper camera and you're not able to scan QR codes, or the grocery, whatever, does not have one, you would struggle to buy. If you go to India, they don't really use credit cards, and if you're in Africa, they have M-Pesa, which is more popular and more prevalent than anything other, or any other payment method. And what I'm trying to get at is that payments are not just about transferring money or stored value. It is not about just buying a tomato or paying for your cocktail or for my milk or for anything else for that matter. Payments are essentially a cultural phenomenon. And if you want to know where people are from, pardon me for ending the sentence with a preposition, then you should get people from different cultures around the table, have them eat a meal at a restaurant, and ask them to pay in the method in which they are accustomed to pay in their own country. And then you'll know where they're from. Payments are not just about transferring money or paying for goods. So now we understand what payments are. So what's crypto? I started off by saying that I could not care less about Bitcoin. I do not care about Ether. I certainly would not advise to buy Dogecoin, not because that's financial advice. There is never financial advice. Just because, in my personal opinion, no one has yet to become a millionaire by doing what another millionaire said to do on Twitter. But that's just me. So what am I about and what is crypto? If we had this conversation in 2014 and my friend Guy and I were just talking about that.
You know, one second, you have to be, because here you sound
Great.
But at the back, they don't hear you that
Oh
well.
no, you're missing
Now-
out
now
on
it's good.
all the fun. I'm saying so many smart things. So let me try it this way. So what's crypto? If we had this conversation in 2014, many people would have said that crypto is for buying drugs, obviously, and for terror financing or a niche for tech people, or maybe a little money laundering on the side, all the good stuff essentially. If we had this conversation in 2017, you would have known what Bitcoin is. You've probably heard of a couple exchanges. Maybe the name Vitalik rings a bell or starts ringing a bell somewhere in the back of your head. Maybe not. In 2018, you would have known the term dip and hold. In 2019, you would probably had an opinion of some sort and a couple of friends that already have a wallet, mind you. And now in 2021, if I were to ask you what's crypto, you would say, oh, what do you mean? Because we're talking about tokens and we're talking about STOs. We're talking about financing the Louvre with tokens. We're talking about entire buildings built in Lisbon in Portugal through STOs. We're talking about investments by the biggest, largest banks and institutions worldwide. We're talking about securities, and we're talking about bonds, and we're talking about loans, and we're talking about an entire ecosystem. So what is crypto? Is it a security? Is it a bond? Is it a method of payment? Is it a currency if you're in El Salvador? Crypto is neither, and crypto is all of the above. Because just like we need to start thinking about payments in terms that are not just transfer of money, but rather culture, we should also start thinking about crypto not in the regular terms that are familiar to us from older, somewhat obsolete, if not completely obsolescent terms. We need to change our terminology because if all you have in your hand is a hammer, then all problems appear to you as a nail. And I would like to suggest that we are not in the world of nails anymore. So what is crypto? It's an entire different culture, not just payments, not securities, not investments, it's everything. So what's Binance? Our logo is Exchange the World, and this is what we stand for. We not only offer you a crypto exchange where you can buy at the lowest fees in the market, blah, blah, no one cares, or somewhere where you have the widest array of available tokens, yeah, we do, but no one cares. It's not about that. It's more than that. It's Binance Academy. It's teaching people the tools of technology, of trading. It's empowerment. It's the US Congress citing Binance Nigeria as a prime example of women empowerment through our educational programs. It's our goal of reaching 4 million people in Africa and educating them through programs and development and building technology. It is Binance Earn, the opportunity to earn passive income on your crypto just lying there. It is also a Binance staking method on different levels of risk and different opportunities. It is Binance Smart Chain, a completely decentralized opinion for different projects. It's Binance Labs. It's investing in blockchain and small projects in early stage and seed stages. It is everything and far more than that. So what's crypto and what are payments in the age of crypto? Payments in the age of crypto are a completely different culture with its own language and a completely new set of institutions and players. It's about including people who were previously left out of the financial system. It's about empowering people who previously had no access to financial instruments and the ability to save, earn, and invest. It's about breeding an entire new community of actors, changing technology, challenging notions of security, privacy, funding, investment, and payments. It is everything and far more, and we are just growing. So this is my message to you. What are payments in the age of crypto? I don't know. Let's have this conversation in 2 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. So this was Dr. Iram Raif-Lachman from Finance, and I really encourage you all to catch up with her afterwards. Um, would like to invite Guy Benalti. Guy is the co-founder of Bancor. I know if all of you are familiar with them, but it's a very good time to get to know them.
Less mobile today, so I'll just sit here with my wounded shoulder. So first of all, hi everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Happy birthday, Binance. I've known Binance for a long time, and I've had the pleasure of collaborating with them on a lot of stuff, including some of the stuff you do in Africa. We had a visit to the UN with Binance. We're on Binance. We're in discussions with the team on a lot of stuff. So I'm very happy to be here at this event. And you know, not financial advice, but I have a feeling Binance is going to be around for a long time and only get bigger and bigger. So a little bit about my background for those who are less familiar. I am one of the co-founders of a project called Bancor. Bancor was actually the first DeFi protocol in history. We didn't call it that because we didn't know it was called DeFi. We invented what's called the AMM, the Automated Market Maker. And you know, even though a lot of time has passed, I'm very proud that after 5 years, Bancor remains one of the maybe dozen largest DeFi projects in the world. over $1 billion in smart contracts, tens of millions of dollars a day in swaps, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars a day. And over 100 people have come through Bancor's offices, and many of them today have gone on to found new crypto companies here in Israel, abroad, have joined crypto companies. Maybe a couple are even in the audience. This talk isn't about Bancor, but I think it's a good example of what is the potential of blockchain in Israel, because if we could just unleash the potential of the talent in this country, you would have 1,000 Bancors in Israel as opposed to one. These days, when I'm not working on Bancor, I'm part of an effort that's called Tectona, formerly White Smoke, for those who are familiar, and together with a few really great partners, some familiar names here in Israel, Yariv Gilat, Shai Moaban, other really great folks, we decided to take on, one of the biggest challenges that I'm sure all of you face as well, which is that Israel isn't exactly the most friendly environment for cryptocurrencies. So for anyone who's tried to use their own money that they worked for to buy something, digital assets, Bitcoin, crypto, Ether, whatever it is, I'm sure you found out that it's not so simple. And it's definitely not so simple to sell it and bring it back to Israel. And it's not easy to be a company in this space, even though you have nothing to do with tokens. You're just working on technology and security and infrastructure. You can't open a bank account. And if you're an institutional investor or you're a pension fund and you just want to do a little bit treasury diversification, no chance. And I remember in 2013 when I opened my Coinbase and I connected it to my Bank of America, I was buying and selling Bitcoin back then. That was 8 years ago. 8 years have passed and I can't do that in Israel. That is absolutely insane. So at Tectona, we're going to take on that problem. We're going to help the regulator make the right choices. We're going to help the banks get comfortable with this. We're going to help institutional investors at first be able to engage with digital assets, and eventually we'll help retail. And it's going to happen faster than people think. But the problem we face at Tectona and the problem we face at Bancor is one and the same. And I think it's the biggest problem in crypto. And it's not the regulator, and it's not the banks, and it's not the speed of the blockchain or the gas fees or the size of the blocks. It's none of these things. The single biggest problem we face in crypto is education. Education. What is blockchain? It's a huge word. It's like, imagine explaining the internet to somebody in the 80s, right? There's no Facebook, there's no Uber, you don't know all the great things that people are going to do. You can intellectually understand that it's running in a few universities. But do you understand the profound meaning of the internet and the impact it's going to have on society? So how do we explain today the profound impact that blockchain is going to have? On what area? On national security, on how people store their value, on decentralized finance by removing the middleman from most financial services we use, on B2C, where I promise you that in 10 years, the biggest online services won't be controlled by the seemingly indefeatable monopolies that run them today. None of them will be as they are today. Are we talking about social impact? Are we talking about B2B, B2G, transparency? Are we talking about self-sovereignty, not only of digital assets, but over your own digital identity, over the content you create? I mean, there's deep and profound subjects on blockchain, and that one word, it's problematic to use it to encompass everything. And who are we talking to on the other end? Who are we explaining blockchain to? Are we talking to a bunch of, computer science nerds? Are we talking to cryptography enthusiasts? Are we talking to hedge fund managers, VCs? Are we talking to doctors, nurses, veterinarians, bus drivers, teachers? I mean, everybody comes with their own set of knowledge, familiarity with technology, biases about money, right? So it's very hard to communicate what is blockchain, why it's special. And I often see this crazy phenomenon. I've even seen it with people that, come to Bancor. They don't know anything about crypto. A year later, they're hardcore crypto folks. They separate the world into two categories, right? People that are into crypto and what they call no-coiners, all right? And yet, they come to me and they say, I have this challenge. My family, my spouse, my husband, my friends, they ask me, where do I work? And what do I do? And I can't explain it to them. Or I don't know how to explain it to them. And they can't come for a year to work at Bancor before they get it, right? So it's education is a huge, huge challenge. And in the very little time we have here, I want to give you some maybe some suggestions on how over the last 10 years I've come to understand, a better way to talk about blockchain. I don't talk to people about the Bitcoin mining and whether it's green or not green, and I don't talk about, whether the block size is this or that. Those are irrelevant discussions. They're not uninteresting, but they actually tend to confuse people. And so I want to suggest perhaps a technique that can be used to try to make blockchain more inclusive and to try to make people feel more comfortable with it and to try to make people confident that it is an inevitability, right? So that they can then decide what they want to do about that. Do they want to learn more? Do they want to invest in it? Do they want to work in it? Do they want to just, educate themselves? And if you want to bring people into blockchain, I would suggest doing two things. The first thing is try to calibrate on definitions, all right? Because we say words and they mean different things to different people. So I'll just give two examples. Decentralized databases. I mean, in those two words is everything about blockchain, everything about the revolution to come, right? But even if we understand what decentralized means, do we really understand what it means? Do we understand what it means in the context of blockchain? Do we understand what a database is? Right? So I sometimes ask people a question. I'll say, if I want to explain decentralization, I'll say, hey, what's the difference between England and English? And give them a few seconds to think about it, right? And then obviously England is a place, it's a people, it's a culture, it's a physical location on earth, it's got a queen, it's got a government, that's England. But English, it might come from England, but it is obviously an agreement between people, right? If we don't all agree on it, if we don't all speak English, it disappears. It's just something in our heads, right? It is a standard, right? And the most important takeaway that you need somebody to have from the definition of decentralization is that decentralization is about standards, right? And then let's say you're talking about databases. I think most people know what a database is, but do they really understand what a database is? Do they understand what databases did to the world? Do they understand what's different about something that's inside a database and not inside a database, right? What's the difference between an NFT and just some photo on my computer? Right? And so to explain databases, I like to give also an analogy, right? Analogies are the best way to take things people already know and save 20 hours of conversation and just apply that to blockchain, right? So when I'm talking about databases, I like to think, everything digital, I can pretty much put in two buckets. Things that can be copied and things that cannot be copied, right? I can send you photos, pictures, video, whatever. You can send it to your friends. They send it to their friends. We all have copies. Their copies don't hurt my copy, right? But then there are things that cannot be copied. For example, money. If I send Ira some money, it's either here or there. It can't be in between, right? It can't be in two places at the same time. I can't send her a copy of my money. There can't be two people owning 100% of a property in the land registry unless they're married, right? There can't be two guys in the police computer with the same ID unless it's my evil twin from an alternative universe, right? So there are things that cannot be copied. How do we not copy those things? How do we ensure that it won't be copied? We need a database, right? And when you tell somebody that, now they have a tool set to try to apply this to the next thing you're going to tell them about the revolution in databases, right? So the first thing, definitions. Try to work on definitions. The next thing I would recommend is zoom out, all right? Let's look at blockchain from 100,000 feet up and look down. Because then the world is much more clear. Let's look at the planet from the outside. We can say, wow, this is a planet. It's got oceans. It's got continents. We can agree on it. And then we can dive in deeper if we want, right? So as an example, when I try to zoom out and I try to talk about blockchain with my mom, or I try to talk about blockchain with somebody that's not even from the industry, or even if they're from the industry, I like to zoom out and make sure that they feel confident that this is an inevitability. And so how do we do that? One kind of trick I've used is, I like to follow the evolution of technology and see how it really mimics the anthropological evolution of people, right? So if you think about a human being, we've got a brain, it processes information, then we talk to other people, right? We're communicating with other people, and then we remember things and write it down so we can store our knowledge over time and space, right? We process, we communicate, we store. And if you look at computers, they kind of went through the same journey. Computers at first, they just processed. And in fact, they processed something very specific. It took a while till we had the general purpose computer. I'm sure we all saw the movie. And then they connected the computers together. Now they're communicating with each other. We have networks. And finally, they started storing data. Now we have databases, right? And you know, in all aspects of technology, they tend to mimic human development because they are, in fact, developed by humans. Now, when we look at that kind of technology stack of processing, communicating, and storing, we see something else that's really interesting. We see that they always started out proprietary, and they were always eventually replaced by standards, right? So we had many different kinds of PCs, many different kinds of computers, but in the end, the IBM PC compatible architecture, that's what won. And all computers, even MacBooks, use that architecture. If we look at communication, it started out proprietary. We had DARPANET, ARPANET, UUNet, Prodigy, CompuServe, AOL, what have you. And all of them were replaced by the internet because standards are powerful things. When nobody owns something, then everybody owns something. And then you can build on that because it doesn't belong to somebody else who's going to shut you down. And everything you build on it adds value to everyone else. A rising tide lifts all boats, right? And when we see it that way, we understand that databases today are closed and proprietary. And just like processing, just like communication, it is inevitable that they will also become public standards, that they will also become public databases. So why hasn't it happened until now? Because it's too hard. The technology didn't exist. Until 2009, nobody released viable proof that you could have a decentralized database not owned by anyone. Now, I think that, you know, when you phrase things that way, it becomes easier for people to get confident that this is something that's not a fad, this is something that's here to stay. Where it gets a little more complicated is what will be the winning technology, what year will it happen in, which teams will be the victors, how will it impact different tokens, should I speculate or not? These are already more granular and niche questions, and you know, they become much more blurry. But the more we zoom out, the more clarity we have. So I just would encourage everyone, you know, you don't start out learning about consciousness and biology. You need to learn about chemistry, right? There's no biology without chemistry. And you don't start out learning chemistry. You learn physics. There's no chemical reactions without physics. And you don't even start with physics, you start with math, right? That's the basis of everything. So when you want to talk about blockchain, when you want to learn about blockchain, when you want to think about blockchain, don't start at the top, right? Start at the bottom. And that means zooming out. And from there, build it block by block. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy Benalti. That was phenomenal, very inspiring. Thanks a lot. For our next fireside chat, I'd like to invite two dear friends. The concept will be transforming the Israeli payment landscape, and I would like to invite Ohad Maimon. Hi, Ohad. Ohad is the CEO of Hype, and we have Iris Weingreb. I really hope I pronounced it pretty well. FinTech lead from Shibolet. So, okay, this works. Now try to talk to the mic so in the back they'll hear you as well.
So should I start by going easy on you?
Yeah, everybody can hear me? Yes? Good.
So easy. Let's start with Hype.
Let's start with saying hi and congratulations, Finance, Elon. You have done well. Please.
Very well, so more Hype? Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Before I tell about myself, I think I should tell a bit about Hype. Hype is a new fintech company. I'm very excited about it because I think it's for the first time in Israel. It's a company that has a full merchant service suitable exactly for the merchants in Israel. I think that many people have talked here about the problems of being, a consumer in Israel, buying bitcoins and buying crypto and such. Nobody talks about the regular problems of merchants in Israel. And I think it has become very, very complicated to be a merchant in Israel. And Hype was established understanding this pain. We are quite keen about helping business thrive by providing them with a simple and holistic payment solution and fixing the broken value chain that have here in Israel. So a bit about myself. Over the last 6 months, I've been establishing Hive. It's a consolidation of 4 companies in Israel. Kasfit, which is a very known terminal estate company in ECR. Credit Guard, which you probably all know, it's the largest payment gateway in Israel. Yal Sarif, which is a gateway mostly designated for developers. And Easy Account, which is an invoicing platform in Israel. Previous to that, over the last 5 or 6 years, I've been the VP of strategy and biz dev at Max. And before that, like you, and probably like most of the people in the crowd, I've been a lawyer at Forbid. With Hira, by the way. Once again, Hira.
So maybe you could tell us a bit more about these challenges that merchants and businesses are facing, and what are the solutions you are offering them?
Okay, I think that I've been talking a lot over the last few years about the broken value chain in Israel. It's very hard to be a merchant, and it's all about the infrastructure that we have built over the years. Let's take Oded, for example. I don't know if you know, but Oded loves to bake some cookies, right? Now, he's very, very good in baking cookies. And one of the days, he decides that he wants to, start selling his cookies over the internet. Now, he's an expert in baking cookies, not in payments, right? He wants to connect his website. He's building a website. Then he needs to find a gateway. What the hell is a gateway? He doesn't know that. And then it's not enough. He needs to connect from the gateway and sign an agreement with an acquirer. Keep in mind that he's baking cookies, right? And he wants to sell his cookies. And then again, the acquirer might tell him that his website doesn't fit the gateway and he needs a specific plugin. And it's not enough. He then understands that he needs also an invoicing solution, so it's another vendor. So we are talking here about 4 or 5 different vendors for just selling the good cookies that Oded can sell us. And that's not enough, because if Oded opens or wants to open a pop-up store and he wants to connect the physical store to the online store that he opened, nobody here really offers this. This is exactly the point where Hive stands in. And we can offer today, with the building blocks that we have set from the 4 companies, we can build a real fully omni-channel solution that suits every merchant in Israel. Even if you are a graphic designer up in the north, or if you are the largest payment platform in Israel, we are providing this solution. And I think that what we can say that we can build this solution in a way that you do not have to be a payment expert to consume payments or to start selling. We need to simplify the life of the merchants in Israel, and that's exactly the mission of Hive.
So this is the aspect of between the various vendors and the merchant. And as we've been saying, I'm a lawyer, I'm from the FinTech-Aviv team, and what I've been hearing all the time, what I'm encountering is it's really difficult for the fintech firms to come on board because of the encumbrance regulation, because of unfriendly banks, and so on and so forth. But we also know that the issue that is not that much discussed is that the infrastructure that you've been talking about, also to connect to the payment systems, to the central payment system, it is very difficult to widely deploy. Do you tackle this issue?
Yeah, I think that you have raised a very painful point. And I think that it's a very serious point that we should all be worried about. Over the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years, I've been negotiating with probably the largest fintech companies in the world. All of them are very interested in the Israeli ecosystem. But keep in mind and ask yourself how many of them are really operating here in Israel. There is a reason for this. And it's not just because we're a small market, because we are a very interesting market. The real answer is it's very hard for them to deploy their services here. And it's very hard for them to deploy their services here because we have a damaged infrastructure. How many fintech wanted to connect themselves to the central switch and could not be able to do that. Okay? How many of them have started to saying, okay, it's very simple to connect to, to any bank, and then they understood that we have a very localized payment system, one that is built patch on patch and not with the international standards. By the way, I think that one of the solutions that we are offering today, and one of the reasons that we are already connected to 9 or 10 global acquire, is the fact that we are building this infrastructure, this kind of API service for the fintech in order to enable them to connect through Hive to the central switch. I think that we have a serious problem here, and I think that we should all be concerned in terms of bringing more innovation and more competition to the financial sector. We should all be very worried from the fact that fintech players are not active enough in Israel. And once again, we should ask ourselves another question. How many of the companies that you probably heard, and I think that you know that you have represented one of them at least, that went IPO over the last 3 or 4 months, how many of the fintech players are really active in Israel, not R&D based, really active? Ask yourself this question and ask yourself why. And I can tell you that with all of them I've been negotiating, and it's very hard for them to deploy their services in Israel. And this should be a real concern for us.
So, okay, we know that there's more and more, there's growing interest in the world with trying to tackle some of the issues with, well, crypto-based or blockchain-based payment solutions. And we know that Visa and MasterCard are interested. Are you going to join in to the party?
Sure. No doubt. I think that we can fairly say here that in the next 3 or 4 months, we will have a proof of concept of building a gateway capability that will enable through our hosted payment page to add cryptocurrency as a payment means in a way that the pay-in will be by crypto and the payout will be a fiat currency to the merchant. Now we have some issues with this. We have a lot of issues. I think that if we take one for example is the fact that the financial system is still very suspicious of crypto. And you will find no big merchants that wants to deposit a crypto transaction into a bank. Well, I think that guy has been talking about this, but it's not the only problem. What we should know about deploying crypto is that it suffers from the same situation that Ira was mentioning in ENP. Crypto at the moment is very good for a P2P transaction, but if you want to deploy it as a B2C, you still need to have the infrastructure in place. You need the gateway services, you need a terminal that will talk with the right protocol. You need to have the right infrastructure. It doesn't work without it, okay? And I think that this is another point where Hive stands in. I can fairly talk that during the integration of Apple Pay coming to Israel, we have enabled most of the sites that accept Apple Pay today. And without this, Apple Pay could not have been enabled in Israel. So I think it's a very important point, and I hope that many merchants would tend to use crypto as a B2C and a payment means.
I'll go back to crypto in a minute, but since you mentioned Apple Pay, well, Apple Pay is here, and maybe Google Pay is on its way. The giants are here. And do you see any room for competition once they're here? And how would it affect Hive for a start? And what do you think the government should do in this respect?
So I'll begin from the end. Apple Pay and Google Pay coming to Israel is great news for Hive. We have enabled Apple Pay over the last year, doing so in over more than 35,000 terminal or point of sale and more than, I would say, a few tens of the largest e-com sites in Israel. By the way, I can share with you a small, some data about Apple Pay transactions. I would say that on physical stores, we see something like 20 times more transactions than we see on the website, which means that people are not using it are not using yet Apple Pay as a checkout button. I think that my prediction is that this will be changed very soon, and probably once Google Pay will step in. Is this good news or bad news for competition? Is there enough room for competition? There is always enough room for competition. And I'm telling this to the Israeli startups and to the Israeli fintech. Just keep in mind the next point. In consumer transaction, 30% of the consumer transactions that we see in Israel are still in cash. More than 20% are still in checks. Is there a room for competition? Yes, always. Is this good news for the payment application, the local payment application? No, it's bad news because the giants are here. My real concern from the giants entering to Israel is the fact that I would say they might block innovation in a way. And I think that everybody is talking about this in FinTech, which I don't know how to translate to English, but we all know about this and FinTech. And I think it would be very hard to be rude when you have this giant in place. The government, once again, the government should do whatever it can in order to enable more and more competition and more innovation coming to the market. And then the government should be very concerned if one player will rule the market. I think that this is a very bad situation. Nobody is talking. I think that we're not talking enough today about the fact that big tech might rule this world and innovation. And Israel is an innovative place. They might kill it. Okay.
Do we have time for one more?
One more.
So,
kind of
since your background is in one of the largest, biggest credit card company in Israel, and again, if I'm going back a bit to regulation, we can say that potentially a blockchain-based solution could render the traditional financial service providers redundant. But when we see, for example, the latest payment law that regulates an array of arrangements for dividing the risk between the three players, customers, merchants, and the service providers, that won't work on blockchain. Blockchain does not allow for errors. So where do you see the traditional service providers in the blockchain era?
So that's a great question because it gives me an opportunity to talk about this payment law and to try and make a point. And the point is that it's not that this law is not up to date with crypto. It's not up to date with the current situation already. So we have some kind of clauses that talk about responsibility in payments. And the fact is that the regulator has invented a law that has no precedent around the globe. It has invented an SCA standard for certain transactions that does not exist across the globe. So I think that what we should do as a startup, the regulators should consult itself with the ecosystem, with the experts. And the Bank of Israel has today some very good experts that know something about payments. And I think that we have missed this point. And to your last point, I think that we are just at the beginning of talking about crypto, but we have a lot of questions to ask, and we have to adjust many laws. And the fact that you are talking about errors in crypto and stuff like this is not the only question that we should ask ourselves. I don't know if Oded will talk about CBDC. I hope he will. But there are many questions that we should ask ourselves. If we have a problem with the digital coin, who do we call, Oded? Can we call you? I don't know if that's the right answer.
My number.
I have your number. But I think that this might transform the role of credit card companies and the role of banks, maybe to become the processors of this point. And there are many questions, and I'm not sure that we still have the answers, but it's a good start to ask these questions.
Thank you very
Tal,
much.
at this moment, she is looking at you and asking, should I finish now? The dessert is here.
No,
So
no, it's
I'm the
not.
last one who's standing between us and the dessert. What's for dessert?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thank you very much, Iris. Thank you, Ohad. Actually, Odette, we're going to have a fireside chat later, and we have a lot to discuss from everything that's been here. So our next fireside chats, focusing on the future of marketplaces, from inventory to price discovery. I'd like to invite Mr. Shelley. Hi, Shelley. How are you? Good to see you, Shelley from Hassan's. And we have the wonderful Guy, CEO of Xberry. So take your seat. We'll change the slide. So it'll be, oh, it is you now. All right, you go. Enjoy. I'll give you a 2-minute mark.
I thought you were going to give me dark glasses under here or something. Good evening, everyone. We are now going from this localized discussion we just had about the Israel market to the how to conquer the globe, and we're going to be focused on the global vision we've been hearing tonight, the global vision from the first two speakers. I'm Shelley Friedman. I work with Hassan's from Gibraltar. We offer Israeli participants licensing and global opportunities and residences and domiciles. So anyone who's interested here in having a European or UK licensing activity or a presence, come and see me later. We're a proud sponsor of FinTech-Aviv. So a lot of the vision we heard at the beginning, so articulately expressed, it's sort of like the United States when the automobile was invented. Everything was railroads. You know, Europe became and continued into our own living memories as a railroad civilization, where the trains really were life. But in the United States, when the car was invented, the railroads lost their monopoly. They were the big, rich companies. They were the Carnegies and the people that are legendary. And how did that happen? It happened because the government decided, with little nudging from the oil companies, to build an infrastructure. And they built all these roads, these amazing roads. And our guest tonight, we're very fortunate to have Guy Melamed, whose company is really building the infrastructure and helping the digital infrastructure people build their infrastructures. And all the vision that we've been hearing tonight isn't anything without people like Guy building the infrastructure. Tell us a little bit about how you're doing that.
So, hi everyone, good evening. First of all, thanks a lot for the event. You've promised me a good breeze and I'll be here, so it just started, thanks for that. So we've been around for 2.5 years, 3 years. We are the next generation infrastructure of, we've started actually, we're born in capital markets, so national stock exchanges, the real thing. And we've created a native cloud, asset agnostic, agnostic to every blockchain, legacy technology, whatever you choose. But we decided actually to revolutionize. We started from the capital markets, taking them to the next generation marketplace. Since we saw at 2017 approximately that the amount of new assets that are growing in our world are explosive. It's not only crypto. You know, when we speak about digital securities today, NFTs is the buzzword. In my previous company, we started R&D for NFTs. It was 2017. That was the first R&D group in my company. But we saw that actually that the current infrastructure will not be able to make this transition. Not only the audience, but I mean the shoppers and everyone cannot use the current infrastructure and buy digital securities. And I'm not speaking about only cryptocurrencies. So at that stage, we decided actually to work on our platform. Today, actually, we're already in the market, meeting national stock exchanges, digital securities, and the next generation marketplace. Suddenly we saw the whole shift to a new shopping experience, which is much more transparent, fair, that connects you both to the supply and to the demand, enables you actually to enjoy this new world.
Okay, so Guy, tonight we've heard, you know, the scenarios that we all know, like, you know, there was no internet, and then eventually the internet evolved, and now we're saying there was no crypto, there was no blockchain, and we all know, we're all sitting here knowing, like, in 15 years, we're looking back to this night and saying, that was before it evolved. What are you doing that's so unique and so special that's going to help this evolve?
So basically, we're moving the whole industry, and it sounds a bit ridiculous because again, we're not a blockchain company, okay? But all the national stock exchanges are either on-prem or an in-house designed national stock exchange, technological ones, and we are moving them all to the cloud. So you need to have a totally different native architecture in order to make that happen. When I listen to Guy, friend and colleague, speaking about Tectona, at some stage, they will need national stock exchanges to accept not only cryptocurrencies, but also digital securities. Now, the current situation in national stock exchanges cannot enable new assets, the diversification of assets, to be accepted on their existing technology. So basically, we enable all asset types.
You're a SaaS platform.
We're a SaaS platform, totally in the cloud.
Who's a typical customer that you would be after?
So the boring part, or the traditional part, and again, it's very important that we're born in the capital markets because it's highly regulated, centralized, et cetera, but we need to enable them to make the transition. Otherwise, we're not only stuck with regulators, okay, we're stuck also with technological barriers. But at that stage, we saw suddenly that we're not speaking only about national stock exchanges. Suddenly we have small and medium exchanges, startups starting up a new exchange, not only for crypto, but for wine, for influencers, for ESG, NFTs. There are so many assets. We are meeting every day 5 new types of assets every day. Now, the technology, it's impossible.
Can you explain to our audience how a SaaS platform operates in that market?
First of all, you have to, from performance, security, you got to do millions of transactions per second, and you got to think on your client that you won't be ending up with millions of dollars monthly fees. Okay, and these were the prices in the traditional capital markets. And now we're looking into new marketplaces or small marketplaces, even fashion, as an example. Okay, you won't be able to pay such a margin on a platform. So we're revolutionizing also the model. We can take it. You pay as you go.
But that's generic for us. Like, what are the barriers that your potential and current customers are facing that you are ready to move on?
So creating a fair trade. I mean, when you look at millennials today and the next generation that will follow them, okay, they're looking for a fair trade. They don't want to be, the whole shift from an inventory-based marketplace to a price discovery marketplace is a major shift. You want to know not only that it's in stock, but you want to know the history. Why is the price $100? Why is it not $50? Why was it $50 last week and today it's $150? And can I place a bid for $75 and with the speed will be matched? How do I make sure that I'm getting the right asset, everything is settled in an orderly fashion? So this is an experience. It's not only a shopping experience, but it's also enabling people to have a new kind of buying experience. So we're taking actually stock exchanges characteristics and we're infiltrating and bringing them to the marketplace.
So you have a pretty experienced track record. I imagine there were a lot of things you could have done in this industry, but you picked this company. Where do you see this company going?
So basically, the train has left the station. Okay, all the national stock exchanges are moving today from in-house and legacy technology to cloud. Okay, so probably within 3 years, we will see every national stock exchange and marketplaces starting to trade also with digital securities and digital assets. And again, the diversification of assets is enormous. And so first of all, we see ourselves as being one of the major players out there to make this replacement and help this transition.
Globally.
Of course, globally. In Israel, as you know, the regulators are still a bit slow, even though we're working with them also and making sure that Israel is not only in the forefront of technology, but we can work together with the regulator and enable new asset types to enter the arena. We're working today in the US, we're working in Latin America, we're working in APAC, we're working in Europe, not only with national stock exchanges, but also derivative stock exchanges, futures, naturally crypto, NFTs, sustainability, ESGs. I mentioned influencer exchange. So everything that can be either tokenized or fractioned or so many types of new assets that need to be accessed, and in the current infrastructure it's impossible. Even the barriers in crypto exchanges that were with them since 2017, 2016 when we saw the big surge in cryptocurrencies. They're also looking to open up to new digital assets.
So do you think liquidity will follow good infrastructure?
Oh, definitely. I mean, if the technology enables it, okay, performance, security, very important. Okay, approved by regulator. Okay, so we're a centralized player. We're connected to all blockchains easily. 2 months, you have a production grade product out there. Okay, so and if you enable also a pricing as you go, from AWS, if you and I are opening a startup today, so we'll pay nothing at the beginning, and then it'll be $500. But when we're big and famous, we'll pay $100K for AWS. Same with these kind of exchanges and marketplace. That's why the whole shift from national stock exchanges to speaking about marketplaces and next generation marketplaces is essential in our DNA.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any advice to any of the younger people in the audience?
First of all, open your minds, and I invite everyone to speak to us at Expery because we can really elaborate on the various topologies of asset types that we're meeting by the day, and juxtaposed to that, we see amazing business models that are also emerging, and we see how the audience is connecting to it. On the one hand, as for regulators, I know the Israeli regulators also open to that, and we know other regulators from the world. Gibraltar, as an example, we've got a client there as well. Actually, it's much easier to go there, and it's a great place to do our business. But we see it also in other places around the world, and everyone is pretty advanced. And the Israeli regulator is aware of that change, and they're working as hard as they can. Now that we have a government, hopefully it'll start moving a bit faster. So it's important for us to have a flagship up and running here.
Before we leave, just tell us very briefly about your backer, OM2.
So OM2 is an incubation house and an investor here in Israel. It's been in the fintech industry for about 20 years, highly experienced in many markets around the world. And we've been incubated in that house, and that's amazing because we've got an amazing technological stack of people working with us. So our R&D teams are really state-of-the-art, also enabling us to welcome every blockchain. And again, we are working around the world with every leading blockchain because we are suddenly becoming a gateway for all the biggest financial institutions, hence so enabling also smaller ventures to launch. Great people, great DNA, and a great house. I welcome you all to come and visit us. Thank you, Shelly, very much.
Thank you very much, Guy. Thank you, Shelly. Thank you all for staying with us so far. So we have our final fireside chat, and I think this will be like throughout the entire day, all the content built up for this fireside chat. So please welcome Mr. Oded Salumi. Oded, please join me. Fireside chat. Oded and we actually have a very long history for several years. And so we're going to talk about banks, fintechs, and big techs, the evolving payment revolution in Israel. So first, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Just want to say I have a long history with many of you, so nice to be here. And
it's okay. Yeah. Okay.
Very interesting to be on the other side as a regulator.
Yeah, and people like everybody on stage will actually keep mentioning the regulator.
Yeah, you all love us.
Maybe it's time you introduce yourself. But first, you know what? Let's really start by a short introduction of yourself for those of you who don't know, and then we'll dive into our discussion.
Pleasure. So my name is Oded Salumi. Thank you for having me. I ran Visa's operation in Israel for many years. That's how I got to know many of you, including building a global-facing innovation center in Tel Aviv. And I did a lot with fintech companies over the years. In the last 8 months, I think it is, I joined the Bank of Israel, where I had payment systems and settlement. We have three main functions in the team that I lead. One is to literally operate and manage the RTGS settlement system as well as the check clearinghouse. So, people start at 6:30 in the morning and go home at 11 o'clock at night working with all the banks moving money. Another team works with supervising the settlement systems that are not part of the Bank of Israel, so for example, Shua, Masab, and others. And then we have another group that does policy, establishes policy for payment systems, and in collaboration with another team, payment methods. And I'll explain more as we go through the fireside chat.
So really, I don't think, I hope you all grasp the amount of experience that we have here. So thank you again. And I'm going to start with something that people think about, but I don't think people are talking about enough. But the payment landscape in Israel, it's not really that spaced. I mean, there's the banks, and they're really dominating the payment landscape in general. We have, so you see companies like Hype, for example, who are now working to enter into the market, or you see companies like Kolu, who tried really hard and had a great concept, but they weren't able to even sustain the strengths of the really large financial institutions. So is the payment landscape in Israel limited to the large financial institutions? How do you see that?
So, good question. I think in general in the world, the largest payment service providers are banks and will always be banks. Think about your behavior as a consumer. You're most likely to use the card issued by your bank as your primary card, do wire transfers from your bank. But if you're younger, or if you're more technology oriented, you may look to non-bank institutions. And one idea that has become very common across the world, and we're pleased it's finally coming to Israel, and part of my role is to promote, is that payment instruments, payment methods, payments are not a bank product necessarily. In fact, if we look at some of the really cool things that are happening in payments around the world, we see them being led by big tech, large technology companies, and by fintechs, some of yourselves. And that's probably because they can start without legacy systems and build a new, start in the cloud. They don't need to think about what they need to do to migrate from the cloud. And they're probably smaller, faster, and less regulated. And so when we think about payments as a space that goes way beyond banking, we also need to think about, well, why does that matter? Why would the consumer really care? I think one reason is that when we think about payments, we can think about a much larger scope than how we pay, because a technological payment process creates data, and that data can form the foundation for many other offers. It could create a foundation for smart credit, make the lender more comfortable taking underwriting risk, make credit available to underbanked or unbanked communities, to small businesses that have a harder time getting access to credit. And what we see around the world is that payments have now become a platform, going beyond the customer engagement for payments, a platform for other services. If you go look to the Far East, some of the payments players have become marketplaces. They've become platforms to sell massage, and medical services, and the taxi ride, and on and on. So payments really are just the beginning of a much larger journey of merging industries, which banks are an important part of, but it goes far beyond banking.
So where do you fit in the orchestrating this entire landscape and allowing also fintechs? Because we know that the financial institutions globally are really dominating this landscape, but how can fintechs interact? Because at the end of the day, even the financial institutions are utilizing technologies coming from startups. They're implementing a lot, they're investing a lot. It's a great model to have a B2B2C model. But is it enough to really build a more, say, competitive landscape for payments?
So as you know, I work for the central bank of the country, the Bank of Israel. And our group is less known than some of the other divisions.
Yeah.
Our mandate is first and foremost to ensure and maintain the stability of payment systems, right? You can't mess that up because it will impact the entire economy. But we also have another mandate, which comes under the category of efficiency, so stability and efficiency. And under efficiency, we have competition and innovation. And that's not just us. If you look at payment systems regulators across the world, look on the PSR's website in the UK, they literally mention competition and innovation as part of their scope, part of their focus. And in order to enable competition, we need to provide equal access and fair access to all payment systems. So I think it was Ohad who mentioned that there are global fintech companies that would like to operate in Israel, but they have a hard time doing so because they have a hard time connecting to the national switch. I'm not sure which switch you were talking about, but it doesn't matter because whatever payment system it is, it's faster, easier, more efficient to be able to connect directly rather than to force one fintech company or another, be they Israeli or non-Israeli, rather than to force them to go to a bank and say, okay, you need to connect through the bank, and the bank will connect the payment system, because not only does it become challenging technologically and subject them to legacy systems, it can also become challenging from a business perspective, because business is not the most profitable industry. As I said earlier, it's a basis for other types of offerings. So making it cheap is important, and the fewer layers that fintech needs to go through to access the payment system, the cheaper it is for them. But there is a tension here, because if we take a cool global fintech or a local fintech or whatever it is, give them access to the payment system, and we're responsible for overseeing the stability of that payment system, how do we make sure that happens? Because God forbid, we find ourselves dealing with a cyber attack on a national platform for payments, or God forbid, worse things happen. So we need to balance the two, and we're taking many measures to make that happen. I can go into more detail, or we can go to the other questions if you want.
No, I want to touch on that because you mentioned like the global fintechs or big techs even coming to Israel. And in Equitech actually, we've worked with different fintechs who are interested in engaging the Israeli market. They might be for foreign countries. And one of the questions that they ask is, okay, how can we be regulated? Each in their own department, but how can a company navigate in the Israeli regulatory framework? And how can they know, okay, should I talk to the Bank of Israel, or should I go to the SEC, or who's in charge of what?
So this is a very legitimate question, but I want to put it in context. The answer to this question is unclear in the vast majority of countries in the world.
Indeed, I agree.
Go to the United States as a financial technology company, be it in payments, in securities, in any space, and try to figure out how to get regulated, because you want to do it right. You don't want to be breaking any laws. That is a challenging proposition. I took the most complicated example in the world, the United States. There are places where it's easier. Go to Switzerland, there's one regulator that oversees it all. So let's try to make a little bit of sense of what's happening in Israel. Before I do that, maybe I should also say, as an overriding matter, that the multiple regulators in the financial space in Israel do talk to each other. I have some colleagues from the Bank of Israel here, and they will vouch for this. We spend a lot of time trying to align. We don't always align. It's not always possible. We don't always have the same focus. We don't always have the same priorities. But there is communication that goes on, and also ask whoever you're talking to in the regulation space, am I talking to the right person? Should I talk to a different type of regulator? So, and I should also say that because part of our mandate as the payment systems department at the Bank of Israel is to help provide access to payment systems. So if you're having a problem, if it's difficult, especially if you're a financial significant entity, meaning you didn't just start developing code in the basement last month, then give us a call, contact us. It's not that hard to reach us, and in Tal can put you in touch with us as well. So who are the regulators? We have, there was talk earlier about needing to be able to provide a license to non-bank payment service providers in Israel, because without a license it's very difficult to operate. There are two regulators which are eligible candidates to become the supervisor of PSPs, payment service providers that are not banks. Those are the Israel Securities Authority, Rashut ניירות Erech, and the Capital Markets Authority, Rashut Shuk HaHon. But even, and we have had a legislative challenge in the last 2 years. We have not been able to pass that law to make the final legislative decision which of those two regulators will be the regulator of these fintech companies. We are all working very energetically to get this done now that we have a government that seems able to pass laws.
Yeah, a lot of the laws have been. I mean, everybody were waiting for government to be
Right.
organized in order to do that.
That having been said, the Capital Markets Authority actually published a nohal, don't know the word in English, which establishes criteria for applying for a license in a financial asset. We look at nefes finanzi, and it is possible to try to get a license that way already. Okay, and that is a fairly recent development. Other regulators that are relevant to the industry. So in the Bank of Israel, there are two main bodies that regulate financial entities or systems. So that's the supervisor of banks, and the Mefakach al Bankim. That's a very large division which has lots of media coverage and everybody knows about them. They mainly regulate banks, but they also regulate new banks. So many of you have heard about the first digital bank, Bank Digital Rishon, which got a license from the Bank of Israel. We're very happy to have it happen because it's been many years since the new bank got a license in Israel. That's under the supervisor of banks. And they also regulate significant acquirers. If you don't know what that word means, it's processors of payment cards. And the three large payment card companies, Max, Yitzhak, and Kal, also are regulated by the supervisor of banks. So I've mentioned three so far. A fourth regulator is me. So we regulate payment systems, and in that capacity, we ensure that the rules that the payment systems use to enable participants to connect are fair and equitable and efficient. And one, I'll talk about EMB in a minute. That's okay.
Yeah,
Just one more.
I want to mind
Yeah.
the time in the.
So I have to be fair to the regulators, though. So two more. Okay, there is the Competition Authority, Rashut HaTacharut, which has a lot to say. So if you're a new market entrant and you feel that there is anti-competitive behavior in the market which prevents you from progressing, that may be your first port of call to say, hey, entity X, Y, or Z is preventing me from entering this market fairly, and they are very active in the financial space, and we have ongoing conversations with them. And then the final one is the Ministry of Treasury, Misrad HaOtzar, specifically Agav HaTaktivim. They, that is in Hebrew, but in English budget, the budget division. They're not a direct regulator, but they're very active in this space. So they track it and they work with all the financial regulators to make sure at least that there is some alignment going on.
Okay, so
Now you're probably even more disappointed than when we started.
That's what I didn't want to say that.
But there are lawyers here. They need to make money somehow.
So with all these, I want to jump to another point, which I think is very relevant to our topic, because you recently had.
You know what? There's one more thing I want to say. Sorry, I know there's another point, but this is very important about the regulation. I'm on the other side now. Okay, I'm going to tell you on a human level, almost everyone I've engaged with, and we do a lot of interregulatory work, is extremely eager to help this community operate in Israel. It's almost like an agenda item. People fight in the regulatory space over what do we need to do to solve this problem that the fintechs are stuck, right? And we take steps to make that happen. But I don't want you to give up. I want you to try. Go to a couple meetings. We can talk about the size of the Israel market. It's not as small as one might think, and there are real opportunities here. And it may be your differentiator if you make it through a few regulatory hoops and others won't be able to. Yeah.
Okay, actually, it was a very addition. But I want you to, if you can elaborate, you had a publication recently about the digital shekel, which people don't understand. Is it going to be like commercial? Is it going to be for end customer? Are you going to use it? What is the purpose of it? And where do you see it fit in the Israeli payment maybe economy? Or where will it fit?
Okay, so just to give you some global context, a very large number of central banks, probably most central banks, dozens of central banks around the world are looking at issuing a digital shekel. So, I'm sorry, issuing a digital currency. It's known as CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency, and in Israel it could be a digital shekel. We call it sheked. Ronit will raise her hand. She made up that name. Sheked is shekel digitali. And right, it would be a very big thing. We spoke with another central bank where they had a team working on this, and they quoted their governor who said, "We might not eventually do this, but if we do it, it will be the most significant thing our central bank has done in the last 100 years." So why issue a digital shekel? We have digital money, right? We have digital wallets. You can even think about credit cards as digital money. Most of the money in circulation is no longer paper bills. Why do we need this? There is no good answer to that question. Okay?
That's not what we wanted to hear.
There are many. There was a headline in Globes where they asked me, some questions, and the headline was, "Do we need a digital shekel?" And the answer was, maybe we'll find out that we don't. But it behooves us to better understand this. Ira stood up here earlier and tried to make the case that cryptocurrency is a payment method or could be a payment method. We disagree, by the way. I think that digital currencies, cryptocurrencies, are really an investment vehicle rather than, you don't see too many people using crypto to pay for goods and services. But still, as central banks, we look at what's happening in the cryptocurrency space, we see how much traction it gets, and we need to understand it. And that's really the main driver. And then we derive from our work all kinds of interesting use cases. So cross-border payments need a lot of improvement. They take too long. They're too expensive. Financial inclusion is a big agenda item, less so in Israel, but in the United States, for example, when they were distributing COVID-19 government grants, they had trouble accessing some of the unbanked population. And they're saying that if they had CBDC, then they'd be able to pay people into their wallets, which have digital currency. There are many discussions around this. There's also redundancy questions. Will it be a system that provides redundancy for existing payment systems? I should say that I have been more of a skeptic about this. I'm less the skeptic now, and that's mainly, he doesn't know he did this, but there was a senior banker at one of the forums where we were presenting the digital shekel, and he said, I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember when the government was considering building Kvish 6. There were questions. Why do we need this? The road system works. Transportation operates. The green movements were all against, taking up land for yet another road. And here we are 20 years later, and Kvish 6 has transformed travel in the state of Israel. And you can't really think about living here and traveling between cities without Kvish 6. And he said, to me, CBDC might be the Kvish 6 of payments and financial infrastructures for the future of Israel. That makes you think.
Indeed, and I'm really eager to see how will this evolve. How will you mobilize and really utilize it in the market? I would really love to have a discussion about whether the crypto is a payment method or an asset. Whether the reason
we'll need a full session on that.
Yeah, but whether the payments are not being made because just of lack of infrastructure to make the payments, or is it just not that, like, people don't find it that easy to use? but we have to put it aside as we are really late on time. But we'll have you again for that discussion.
Well, I can just make two words: ubiquity.
Yeah, I think it's important.
Ubiquity and acceptance. So when you want to launch a new payment method, and we've seen this across the world, this was also the case always in Visa, it's not going to interest any consumer if they can't pay with it anywhere. So then you go to the merchants and you say, the businesses, will you accept my payment method? And the merchant will say, well, why should I? Don't have any users. So then you need to find a way to get users first. So it's kind of like a circular process. I think if you go to a merchant and say, well, I've got 2 million users in the state of Israel, will you accept my payment method? Maybe that'll change the conversation. I don't think we have 2 million active users. So to get to the acceptance and the ubiquity, it's difficult. And the other issue is stability. We have great volatility in cryptocurrencies, and therefore, if I'm a merchant, I'm a business, and I want to sell something, I can't have the price change by, what was it they said, Bitcoin increased by 1,000% over a year or something like that?
Yeah.
That's not a stable enough currency to use for buying and selling goods and services. There is something that I wanted to talk about, if it's okay.
Yeah, last item.
So I just want to illustrate some of the things that we do as regulators to improve the space, and some of them have actually reached you as consumers. If you think about EMV, so going back 10 years, most of the world was already going to EMV. Ira spoke about that. However, there was no case for it in Israel. EMV is that chip in your card, right? And then the terminal needs to be swapped out with a new terminal to work with the cryptogram on that chip. And why did the world go to EMV? Because they had fraud problems with credit cards. And we didn't have a fraud problem in Israel. Why? Because we had a national payments infrastructure with software that managed fraud better than anywhere in the world almost. The fraud levels here were lower than countries that had fully deployed EMV, so they didn't do it. But then what happened was, historically, issuers of cards added a little antenna to that chip that you see in your card. You just don't see the antenna, it's hidden inside the plastic. And they put in the reader, in the credit card terminal, the ability to read that antenna using near field communication, or NFC. And then if you put the card near the terminal and heard a tap, you knew that your card number went from your card to the terminal. And then suddenly they took that chip and little antenna and put it in a chipset in your mobile phone. And then you could take the phone and put it near the terminal and heard a beep. And then people in the UK were paying this way for years, and Israel found itself behind, even though it was ahead with fraud. And there was no case for migrating because it was very expensive, upgrading all the cards and all the terminals, over 100,000 terminals in the country. How do you do that? Well, what we did eventually as regulators, my department and another department working jointly, we went to all the solkim, the acquirers or processors, and said to them, look, we need to make the migration. By a particular date, you will not process any more transactions that are not working using the EMV protocol. And we have now migrated 67% of the terminals in the last year and a half. And guess what happened? 7 digital wallets launched. Most banks, all your cards, I'm willing to vouch, can work with a digital wallet. And then Apple Pay came to Israel, and everybody's talking about Apple Pay. But that happened as a result of a regulatory initiative. And we know about other multinational companies that are coming. Apple Pay was the first global company that came to offer financial services to the Israeli consumer. The one before that was PayPal, if I'm not mistaken. So, there are things we can do, and fairly quickly, if we can just get it right. And we are also making a real effort to be attentive to what you guys are saying to make sure we do get it right.
I really appreciate that you're taking this platform to say this, because I'm pretty sure that almost everybody here, I haven't had a clue that this is the reason, or this is part of the reason of Apple Pay and all the changes that have been here. We all felt that, okay, this is something that can be more convenient, so why wouldn't we have it like the tap and pay and everything around? But it's very refreshing to hear all your work, and really thank you very much.
We're also moving towards digital checks and faster payments. We're making that happen.
So we're looking forward, and we'll see you. We'll host you again and again. Thank you very much for that, Salome, or the Director of Finance.
Salome. Thank you.
So, thank you. So, everybody, I'm really proud of everyone here staying this late. It's dark and late, and I really want to thank you. We had a lot of content today, and this is kind of launching our new event theme. Where all of our events will be here. The delegation that we're hosting will be here. We will invite companies to come sit with us. We have a great fintech space, so come talk to us if you want to be part of this great community and great system. We also going to have, we're going to launch in October our next FinTech course. So if you're interested in learning more about the topic, just reach out and we'll be more than happy to have you. Let's move to some music, wine, and I hope there's any dessert left. But thank you everybody for coming and looking forward to having you again.